Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bible in 60 Seconds. I'm your host. And today, we're going to look at the life of David. Part 1, David the Shepherd. Part 2, David the Warrior. Part 3, David the King. David was the youngest son of Jesse, a poor shepherd, who lived in a small town called Bethlehem. At the time, the nation of Israel was being ruled by King Saul, who had been chosen by God to be Israel's first king. But over time, Saul began to disobey God, which caused him to lose God's favor. The prophet Samuel was sent by God to find a new king to replace Saul. So he went to Jesse and said, "Anoint one of your sons to be king, for the Lord has sent me to say that among your sons a king has been chosen." Jesse then had his oldest son, Eliab, come forward. Samuel saw him and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is so handsome. Surely the Lord will choose him." But God told Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, because I have rejected him. For man looks at the things of man, but the Lord looks at the heart." So Jesse presented his next son, but God told him the same thing. This continued until all of Jesse's oldest sons had come forward and been rejected by God. Then Jesse said to Samuel, "Look, I still have a young son who is out in the fields, tending the sheep. He is a kind and honest lad, but he is small in stature and not good-looking." So God told Samuel, "Go to him." Samuel then went out into the fields to find David, and when he saw him, he knew that he was the one. So he anointed David as the future king of Israel, despite his youth and humble beginnings. We are now going to speed through the rest of David's life before he became king, focusing on his greatest victories as a young man. One of the most famous parts of David's story is his victory over the giant Goliath. At the time, the Israelites were at war with the Philistines, and every morning, a giant from the Philistine army named Goliath would come out and challenge the Israelites to send out a champion to fight him in single combat. If the Israelites accepted and won, then the Philistines would be defeated. But if they refused or lost, then the Philistines would win and get to plunder the Israelite camp. For 40 days, Goliath taunted the Israelites, but no one dared face him. He was a massive warrior with a bronze helmet and armor that weighed more than 5,000 shekels of gold. Not only that, but he also carried a spear whose point alone weighed 300 shekels of bronze. It seems like there was absolutely no hope for anyone to defeat him. But one day, David volunteered to go out and fight Goliath. All the Israelites laughed at him, thinking that he was crazy. They said, "You're just a kid who tends sheep. How could you possibly beat a giant like Goliath?" But David remained confident, saying, "The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." As Goliath approached, mocking David and his men, saying, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" David declared, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David then took a stone from a nearby stream and put it in his sling. When Goliath looked up, David threw the stone, striking him right in the forehead. The stone sank into his skull, and he fell to the ground. David then took Goliath's own sword and drew it, cut off the giant's head, and then threw it into the Philistine ranks. Seeing their champion's head cut off, the Philistines panicked and fled. The Israelites pursued them and beat them, and thus Israel won the battle. This event made David a national hero, especially among Saul's court. His fame reached all the way to the king, so Saul sent for him, and they met for the first time. To make sure that David wouldn't feel intimidated by Saul's presence, an important detail is that when David met Saul for the first time, he didn't bow down to him. It would have been the custom, but instead greeted him like a friend, probably because David was already a friend of Jonathan. Now let's get back to our story. Saul was very impressed by David and welcomed him to his court. In fact, David quickly rose to prominence and became a close friend of Saul's son Jonathan. Saul's daughter Michal also became enamored with David and begged her father to marry her to him. Although Saul had given his daughter to be married as a political alliance, Saul preferred that she marry someone else. He strongly disliked David and treated him very poorly because Saul was afraid that David would take the throne from him. It got so bad that Saul threatened to kill David, forcing him to escape for his life. Yet despite these dangers, David remained loyal to Saul and never plotted against him. In fact, there was one occasion where David had the chance to kill, Saul while he was sleeping, but he felt that it would be wrong to murder the king of Israel, even though Saul had tried to kill him numerous times. On another occasion, David was pursued by Saul and his men into a cave. Once again, David could have killed Saul, but instead he cut off a piece of the king's robe. When he pulled Saul back into the cave, David said to him, "My lord the king, why do you listen when there are men in rebellion against you?" As one man among them has said, "David has failed and must be forced from ruling over Israel. And what is more, the man has spoken in my hearing. But what is my reward today? Is it not just a piece of cloth and a cloak?" When Saul realized the next morning that David hadn't killed him, he was filled with remorse and shame. He then asked David for forgiveness, and the two reconciled for a time. But soon Saul turned against David once again. At this point, David knew that there was no hope for reconciliation between him and Saul. He left Israel and went to live among the Philistines, Saul's sworn enemies. The Philistine king welcomed him and gave him a palace, women, and great riches. Sometime later, Saul's son Jonathan became aware that his father planned to kill David, so he warned him so that he could escape. David, however, refused to escape without also taking his father-in-law's family, since they too would be killed by Saul. After successfully escaping, David and his men fled to the wilderness of Paran. While there, he defeated the Amalekite and rescued them from those who attacked them. Soon afterward, news reached David that Saul had died after falling on his sword during a battle against the Philistines. When David heard the news, he wept over Saul's death and composed a lament for him. This showed that despite all the persecution that Saul had hurled against him, David still had compassion for his former persecutor. Thus, after hearing the news of Saul's death, David refused to accept the Philistines' offer to become their king, saying, "I cannot take the crown from the offspring of Jesse, for I swore to the house of Jesse that I would show honor to his offspring. Therefore I will leave you, and whatever you desire shall be done for you, my lords." Then David arose and came back to Israel. Some of Israel's leaders came to meet him, but when they saw the men with him, they asked, "By what right are you coming here? What is the meaning of this trespass?" David answered them, "The king is dead, and I am next in line." Those leaders then pledged their allegiance to him, and thus David became the king of Israel. So that brings us to the end of our look at the life of David. In part 3, we'll pick up where we left off and look at how David established Jerusalem as Israel's capital city, how he led Israel to victory against its enemies, and how he prepared for the Messiah to sit on the throne of his kingdom.